So it should. Okay, there we are. Welcome everybody. Sorry, I was not feeling well today, but like Scott and I, we've been planning for this talk for a long time, so it was a shame that it would have been cancelled. We are very delighted to host Scott Chambers for our industry guest today. Scott has been a prominent visual effects and compositing supervisor for over 2 decades, like 20 years. That's a lot of years to be on top, on top of like world cinema. So Scott has worked on some of the biggest films globally. He has worked in lots of different places all over the world. He's based in Wellington now, but has worked in London, Vancouver, Sydney, Auckland. Like his notable highlights could be so being compositing supervisor for all 3 Hobbit films. If you enjoyed those movies and the fantastic visual effects on it, you should be thankful to Scott. And he has been part in the Academy Award for the Oscar-winning team for the Golden Compass out of Framestore in London. And we can see Scott working on not just compositing, but like lots of cutting edge emerging technologies as part of compositing, like 2.5D, the environment, fluid simulations, particles within the compositing platforms, high frame rates, emerging take from different movies like Gemini Man, which was filmed at ultra high spec, 120 frames per second. So so he's got a lot to talk about for us today. I hand it to Scott, and I think that's enough of me. So we're gonna listen to him. So although we have, as all of our industry talks, although we have a dedicated Q&A and sorry, at the end, but feel free whenever. Feel free all over his talk. Feel free to turn on your mic or send a text message if you might have any question, and we'll talk it through. Thank you so much, Scott. It's yours now.
Thank you very much, Hussein, and thank you, students, for turning up tonight to hear a little bit about what I've got to talk about, my history, and then I'd love to hear more about from what you are up to and any questions you have specifically about what I've done, or the future going forward, or anything, maybe something you're working on at the moment you want to talk about. But yeah, so my history 20 years in, it's kind of a nice sort of round number, it's sort of plus or minus a few years, I guess, but I'm Kiwi. I'm from Wellington. I was brought up in the 90s on 80s films, basically, when I was a kid. This is, obviously pre-YouTube and everything. So it was like, always loved visual effects, but my only real access to it was like a behind the scenes special, maybe on TV, or you could even, those days, you could rent, you go to the video store, rent VHS tapes, and they would have behind the scenes VHS tapes on some of the movies, like some of the bigger ones like Star Wars and things. So that, for me, that was really telling when I was a kid, because I'd go there and I would get, behind the scene. My parents were like, "What? Don't you want to actually watch a movie?" I was like, "No, I really want to know how it was made." And of course, in those days, visual effects was probably done by about maybe 50 people worldwide. Like it was very specialized in a couple of big companies. So for me, always loved it, but it was hard to find a sort of path into it, but luckily my sort of passion for that were encapsulated like passion for film as well. So I was always really interested in, especially cinematography, which will go hand in hand with visual effects in the old days, because they called them like effects cameramen. That was like a you know, a title for a visual effects artist in those days, because that's really what you did. You had to get a camera, you had to shoot elements, and then compositing was done on an optical printer, you know, physically with layers of film, sort of packing them all together. You know, if you wanted to create like an alpha channel matte, you'd run another piece of film that you'd butt up against the color film, so it'd run through the optical printer and it would expose that. And of course, in the matte, you know, all the black areas would hold back the light going through, and then, you know, anything was white was transparent. So that's kind of how you did it. And, you know, Star Wars, obviously, you know, in the 80s was huge for that, and they're sort of renowned. They built their own optical printers where they could run like, you know, multiple elements through it. So yeah, that was the old sort of, you know, optical days. So so for me, not really being able to do anything sort of digital back in those days. I mean, it was, you know, it was starting to come through, like, you know, the hardware and the software is starting to sort of filter down, so it's a bit more accessible. But I ended up going to film school because I loved lots of things about cinema. You know, cinematography was really big for me, and I just love movies and sort of the technical aspects and the way that, you know, movies could make you feel as well. Like a real good one that sort of makes you think and whatnot was really cool for me, and sort of helped me progress in my life to, you know, always want to be doing something with cinema. I always thought I would. So I went to film school after high school, and that was in Christchurch, and that was a year sort of full-time course, which the course has moved here now. It was called the New Zealand Film and Television School. I think it's merged with one of the polytechs here. And that was great. It was a year sort of, you know, deep dive into all sorts of film production, but no visual effects. It was all like, you know, storytelling and, you know, working with actors and directing and scripts. And, you know, you don't really do so much in a year, but it was pretty great sort of all round education there. And, you know, as I say, and as you will probably will find as you move out of learning and, you know, into the industry, whatnot, it's, you know, it's the people you meet along the way. And I met some fantastic people out of film school, and a lot of them I still know today, even though our class was super small. But they're doing some really great things. And initially in the first few years, that helped me get jobs, help one another get jobs, which was awesome. So yeah, coming out of film school, pretty young, I was still at home. I was working part-time jobs, shooting short films with my friends. You know, any sort of film competition, we could sort of dive into the 48-hour film festival. It hadn't really started, or maybe just started, but we're still doing stuff anyways. Applying for grants from the government, Creative New Zealand. I'm not sure if they still give out grants for short films.
They do.
They do?
Yeah. And 48 hours is still going. Actually, few of my students, I can see them here, like Tyler. She's been part of a team on a 48 hours. So still it's a vibrant thing going on.
That's so good. Yeah, and in that respect, it's like it's all learning. If you love film, you want to do something, you love visual effects, you want to do something, you just do anything. So I was doing that. I was essentially a DP, director of photography for my friends, making short films and whatnot. I was at home, but I was also, you know, working part-time. I work as a camera assistant sometimes on like commercials, and sometimes work for free. You know, that's part of the industry on music videos and things. Not really budget for that. And I landed a job at two of the cinemas here in Wellington. One's called the Embassy, which is sort of pretty famous. It's our big downtown cinema where they had all the premieres for the Rings films and one of the Hobbit films. You know, the red carpet going down Courtney Place, that kind of thing. So I was working there just on like the candy bar, you know, making popcorn and stuff. But through there, like, met a really great amount of people, because it's just all, you know, film people and people making films. And we had the film festival every year, which is amazing, you know. So, you know, sort of moral of this kind of journey that I'm speaking about now is just like, if you love film, just dive into it wherever. Because through the candy bar, you might think, oh, you know, what's that going to do for me? But meeting people, and I expressed interest in being a projectionist, because they don't really have them now, but in those days it was film projectors, you know, which was pretty major job, in the sense of, if you get it wrong, it goes really wrong. But if you get it right, it's okay. So that was fun. I really enjoyed doing that. And that actually, so at the time, you know, I was doing a mixture of all these things: shooting stuff, working part-time here and there on films and at the cinema, and learning how to be a projectionist. But through being a projectionist, I got some work at Weta Digital, in the early days of Rings, they needed someone to help with projection, because it was all shot in film, and they'd film dailies every day. They'd be sending the film to the lab overnight and be coming back in the morning. And so I was attached to Weta Digital briefly. It was just sort of a part-time thing initially to help them out with that kind of stuff when I think someone was away. And just that brief connection. And then I went back into doing other things. I had a friend from film school who was working for a production company in Wellington called Gibson Group, and they needed someone, sort of an all-rounder, that could help out on one of their small, really small, essentially a weekly show that ran for a season. And they needed someone to help out doing, like, shooting DV camera, helping out with the edit, essentially being an assistant editor, doing news graphics, all sorts of things. And it was a pretty cool job, for a young guy to do a little bit of everything in that respect. But yeah, through that and making short films, I ended up making Taika Waititi's first short film with him. I was a camera operator for him, which is so funny to think back now, how far he's come.
Which one? Which one?
Oh, I don't know if anyone would have seen it. It's called John and Pogo, and I gave the tape of it to the Art Film Archives to digitize. I mean, if you look it up online, you'll probably see it on IMDb, but I don't really know if anyone's seen it. But it was a funny little, super low budget little thing. But it was, one of Taika's, very early things. So that was a cool little connection there.
It looks super cool. I'm gonna watch it.
It's quite funny. It's about a policeman and his dog, and there's a few other dogs in it, and they're all just played by humans, so like on all fours, dressed in just kind of skin tight clothing. It's pretty cool. It's a funny little thing, and it definitely, you can see Taika's humor come through in that one. So I mean, for me, it was a really great time, doing bits in the industry, trying to figure out what I want to do, working with filmmakers that now, have done some pretty amazing stuff. And then it came to a time in a lot of young people's lives, and unfortunately, where the world is working right now, not really happening for a lot of young people, which is a bit of a shame. But I went on my OE over to UK, which is pretty typical for Kiwis. I had an ancestry visa. My grandmother was born in Scotland, so that helped me go over. And another kind of pretty typical story for Kiwis going there is, like, a lot of us think, oh, I'll just go there and, work in a pub or something and, make a little bit of cash and I'll travel around Europe and then go home. But when I arrived, I because, pretty new to the sort of film industry, it's only a few years in after film school. But I remember sending out CVs saying, like, hey, to visual effects companies, like, oh, I worked at Weta Digital, I was a projectionist, I helped with, film dailies and all that kind of stuff. Because I thought, yeah, I could do that for a little bit, because it was a fun job, and I figured London was kind of a hotbed for that kind of stuff. And so totally unsolicited, I just sent out CVs to visual effects companies I knew. And then one day I got a call from Jim Henson's Creature Shop, which, Jim Henson's in the old days were pretty famous for a lot of sort of outstanding sort of creative films and TV series. They're still doing stuff out of the US.
And all sorts of things.
Sorry, which ones?
Monsters and, like, all those creatures, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, The Labyrinth is a huge one. I guess that's a pretty old film these days for a lot of your students. Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, pretty major ones for Henson's in the 80s. And yeah, they give me a call, and I hadn't actually sent them my CV or anything. They had it forwarded to them from another company, so someone knew that. And essentially, they're looking for someone to do exactly what I was doing, handling film, running dailies, all that kind of thing. And that was amazing, because I was like 3 months into the UK, and I was like office temping, because that was a good job to get easily and make some money. A few of my friends were doing that, and I just jumped in. I said, that sounds awesome. When can I start? And I started pretty soon after. And then that was sort of basically the proper start of being in visual effects. Obviously, at the time, I wasn't doing computer graphics, I wasn't compositing, I was still handling the film. But all this, everything up till now that I've spoken about, has been really good education. I sort of implore, the students, like, think about, if you've got a direction to go, like, there may be multiple ways to go at it, or, you might sort of side shift a little bit and do something. I was doing editorial for a bit and, shooting stuff for a bit. But anything you can do, you've got a passion for film, and you want to end up in visual effects. Doing anything really helps. And when I look back now, thinking that the knowledge that I had from all sorts of different avenues, it really helps, to this day, a lot of the work we do. So from there to get into the digital side of stuff, I became quite friendly with some compositors at Henson's, and I'd always been interested. Like way back, I'd got a version of Shake, which is sort of the front runner to Nuke.
I started with Shake too.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of people stuff for Shake. It's pretty simple these days compared to Nuke, but you know, Nuke essentially copied a lot of it. I remember trying to, as a crack version, trying to make that work at home a very long time ago, and just with like a PDF sort of manual that I keep getting stuck, and there's no one to get help from, whatever. So I sort of abandoned that a little bit. But it showed in my mind like I was really interested in compositing. So when I was at Henson's, becoming friendly with compositors, and then them showing me a couple of things, and the company was so busy, they were prepared to have me start doing essentially some comp stuff, like really basic level kind of things, more like roto and sort of prep, cleanup and stuff. But I was super lucky because they were so busy. They're like, okay, we can kind of do that as OT overtime. So in the weekends and the evenings, I was compositing, and luckily I had the support of the compositors there, and like the leads and the supervisors to show me the ropes essentially, while still doing my editorial stuff during the day. But that was a great start. And then from there, just doing the classic sort of career progression thing. And London was, it's a pretty great place for it, being able to, I moved on after that to MPC, and I was doing some more roto prep. And then I went to Framestore after that as a junior compositor, and then sort of worked my way up there a little bit, and then back to MPC, and then to CineSite, and then DNEG a little bit. And then, then I was away. But during that time as well, I remember, and I sort of recommend it, and your students probably do this anyway, but when I was very junior at compositing, I knew I wanted to make the best of it. So even though I was working during the day, like at night, I was just studying. I was just get online tutorials, whatever I could get. I was just throwing myself at it. I did that for a number of years, and I felt that really helped being able to progress through. And then Yep.
Yeah. We usually I usually emphasize the importance of like cinematography and understanding the every pixel like on the image that you're looking at. So you before like starting being a compositor, you basically develop that sensitive eye to every corner of the image as a projectionist, which I think I assume that has helped you to just like be a person to understand like the very details of every frame that you work on before moving into the digital realm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It really did help. And handling film as well. And in those days, working with film, I had a lot of sort of intricacies, or some call it degradation, or sort of or grime, sort of nastiness to it, which was like film stock can be quite grainy. It's got quite a lot of noise in it, and it's a little bit soft, and it's got the way that highlights sort of reflect off metal, whatever. You get these sort of halos and stuff. And there's two kind of schools of thought to that then and even now. There's, you hear about sort of film purists, but not so many these days. It's kind of like vinyl and CD kind of thing. Like the film has a certain aesthetic to it, sort of warts and all. It's like vinyl, it's got pops and clicks, but there's sort of a warmth to it. It's analog versus digital essentially. But going back to that and actually handling the film and sort of looking at it physically, you could, if you wanted to know what happens on a piece of film, you get a magnifying glass or a loop, whatever, and put a light behind. You get a little strip of film, and it's a really tactile kind of thing. And then, from that, in digital compositing, we'd be always trying to emulate what film is doing in the digital realm, because you need to marry the two up together, obviously, because if you have pristine CG renders going over the top of sort of the degraded, warmth film look, and it's just going to stick out like a sore thumb. So we used to spend a lot of time trying to marry that up. And these days with digital cameras, you still get some sort of aberrations and imperfections coming out of it, but just so much cleaner, so we don't have to do so much of that these days. But being projectionist, looking at that, and then it's like really useful. Like, I mean, for the most part, you're doing the same thing over and over again. You're threading film through a projector and running it. But even these days, you start talking about on different shows, like this high frame rate show I worked on, Gemini Man, 120 frames per second in stereo, which is just insane statistics. You know, 3.4K. You know, well, they're calling it 4K, so they're rounding it up. But you know, a lot of questions came up, like, well, how does the shutter work? You know, well, digital shutter essentially for the projection, and you know, at different frame rates. And I recall, or how it used to work, sort of in the analog way, and I was able to sort of explain or transpose, you know, the old way of how projectors would work to the new high frame rates, and how that can maybe affect our perception of, like, say, motion blur and edges and that kind of stuff.
What was the first substantial, what was the first project that you substantially worked on it as a compositor? So like, is that at that you just said, oh wow, I'm proud of myself. I'm a compositor from now on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really lucky with timing on one of the shows, and it's, when I say, I mean, it really sticks in my mind. I was working at Framestore, and they had a great program of, Framestore had sort of multiple departments. They had the commercials. They're pretty big in commercials. They do like Bond titles, which is amazing. And they'll do long form, which is, you know, TV, or, you know, what you call episodic these days, and then features. And they'll sort of move juniors through these different departments. So juniors will start like on long form, which I did. And I guess that's the first time, not that I was super excited or proud of the work, you know, I worked on a TV show, but just the way my sort of growth essentially over that time. And it was such a great training ground, because it was working on lots of episodes, you know, with a bunch of other sort of juniors that are being mentored by seniors, where you're doing all your own paint and roto. You know, it's just everything you're diving into. There's no sort of support, sometimes even camera tracks and that kind of stuff. And that was just such a perfect sort of learning ground at all different types of shots and things over a period of time. But in terms of, yeah, once, and it definitely did feel like a long time. It's like, I felt like, oh yeah, well, I'm junior, I'm not really working on the, you know, A-League films, which was understandable, but you could definitely see that's the next step. You can see other compositors doing some pretty amazing stuff. And they used to do things like, you know, we'd be working on our TV show, and I'll see compositors working, you know, other senior compositors working on some of the big sort of tentpole features, and I'd sneakily just grab their scripts, you know, and just have a look at their Shake scripts at the time and just see how they put things together. But yeah, in terms of a film going through after that, Golden Compass, you know, as we mentioned before, that won the Oscar at the time. That was pretty amazing. That was quite a cool show to be involved with, doing a lot of interesting creature work and huge amount of comp integration to get that working into the plates.
Have you been VFX, like a compositing supervisor on Golden Compass?
I wasn't at that stage. I was pretty junior. That was also at Framestore coming up through there. Yeah.
So what was, what was the first one you moved? So I'm looking at this list. Look at that. So yeah, out of your thousands of like titles that you have worked on, so so from Hobbits, as it seems, so you started to be not just a compositor, but also a compositing supervisor, right?
Yeah. The first Hobbit was my first role as a comp super. Yeah.
So like how? What? Well, so this is like what we usually ask these two questions. These questions from our guests, like, what is a day in the life of a compositor looks like? So like you answer two questions. What is a day in the life of a compositor looks like, and what is a day in the life of a compositing supervisor look like?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I can do that. So a day in the life of a compositor would be, okay, here we go. So there's lots of stuff going on. Essentially, when you get assigned a bunch of shots, essentially, on the show, you join your first day or whatever, you might go through some onboarding, some training, and then you end up with a bunch of shots on your plate. And you'll be looking at, production will schedule these out to you. And what I like to do for every member of the teams I work with is give everyone a good spread. Obviously, if you're really junior, you're probably not going to get something super, super hard, but everyone gets a good mix of sort of easier, medium, and hard. Even the most senior of our team, we try and spread it around a little bit. So you'll be essentially assigned some shots, and there'll be sort of deadlines. Normally, you break down shots into, in terms of delivery schedule, we have like a first look target that you're working towards. So obviously, compositing, we need elements. We need to put stuff together. So normally you'll be starting with the plate. There'll be the first thing in house. Okay, we've got a plate, we've got a background, they've shot something, it might be a green screen or whatnot. There could potentially be other elements that have been shot for that shot. There could be other green screen elements potentially. There could be effects elements, say if maybe it's a water scene and they've gone away and they've shot some in a studio, some sort of water elements splashing around or whatever. So you may have things to get going with initially. So you might need a matte painting for the background. You might need a CG creature. You might need some effects rendered of rain or snow or something that may be still coming. So essentially, you're looking at your shots, you're looking at what's been assigned, and you're taking stock of what you've got so far and anticipate what's coming up. And, if it's a good production team, they'll let you know. So, hey, you've only got the plate and, maybe one background's ready, but we expect to have the animation done and the lighting done on the creature next week, and to let you know where that's going to slot in. So you'll be looking at your schedule, figuring out what you can do with what you have, turning shots around for dailies. Generally, visual effects studios still work like that. There'll be probably 2 review sessions a day. You have morning dailies, which is, for work that was done that sort of last evening or in the morning, and then afternoon, essentially dailies again, which, can have different names. More of a catch up in the afternoon to see changes that have been made. Looking at what we want to send to the client, because generally when you get busy on a show, you want to send stuff regularly, which may be every day. So the afternoon is a good place to submit your work, get it reviewed. If there's a decision to send it from there, perfect. Otherwise, there may be like a little couple of changes to do that you could work through in the next few hours before home time, and then that will be sent off. So yeah, and generally that's kind of the flow, and then you progress up the milestone stages. You first look, and then you get it to a point where the supervisor says, let's send it to the client. The client looks at it and says, that's great, you're on the right track, but can we have some more rain here, or there's a fire in the background that can you remove? There'll be some notes and a little bit of back and forth there, depending on the show. There could be a lot, or there could be a little. You hope for like a sort of average size of feedback round notes. And then once you feel the client, the visual effects supervisor that's internally that's presenting the work to the client will be negotiating with them, getting to the point where the question will be asked from our side as the company, are we happy? Do we think we can creatively approve the shot? Essentially to the director. And you either get a yes or no, and the no means you need to keep working, but it's just constantly asking that question until it's like, yes, it looks good, it's creatively approved, and then the understanding is, well, if you're happy with it, the next step is we will tech check it or QC it, going through and sort of cleaning up little sort of matte edges or, anything that's small that needs to be done to make it acceptable to go in the movie. And there's no point doing that all the time, not making sure every tiny little edge is perfect, because you just run around as, you're doing these revisions for the client essentially, and you don't want to dial down onto the small details every time. So that's generally progression. And then once you're in the tech check land, it's just showing it internally to, either your comp soup or whoever, or your VFX soup who's overseeing that sort of QC. And on, bigger movies, bigger studios, there may be additional requirements to purely just the pictures. A lot of the time we deliver mattes as well for the DI, which is the next step after when we deliver to the digital intermediate, where the whole film gets color timed or color graded. And normally a requirement these days is they want mattes of stuff. So if you put a creature in there, they want a matte of that, of the background and whatnot. So there'll be aspects of that need to be tech checked as well. And a lot of stereo 3D films these days, well, the ones that do get made, there's not so many, they generally post-convert them. You may have heard about that. And for post-conversion, it's really helpful if they have layers to begin with, because there is, of course, you can post-convert a film that was just, with no visual effects or just shot like regular film. But as some of you probably realize that to do that, you've got to get in there and just roto the crap out of it and isolate everything. And, you know, you shift the 2 eyes, you've got to paint around edges. It's a real painful thing. So yeah, one of the requirements, if it's a stereo post-converter show, is to deliver everything on layers as well. So yeah, generally that's kind of the play of things in terms of showing shots, getting it reviewed, working towards getting it to that creative approved level. And then of course, like, you know, as a compositor, you've got to work well sort of interpersonally. You know, there's no point being super genius at maybe some tech tools or, you know, really creative, but if you can't work as a team, you're going to run into a bit of trouble. So that's a big thing that we sort of emphasize, or, you know, the teams that I've worked with have been hired because of that, you know. Yeah, it's sort of a rule a lot of places, you know, we hire people that aren't dicks, you know. It's like, you're just like, if you're going to be a dick or not. And if you're not, that's awesome. And what that really means is just that, you know, communication, being humble, you know, it's a tough one, sort of ego sometimes, I know, like, you know, you work so hard on something, and, you know, to have someone sort of critique you, got to get used to that, because that's all part of it. And being, you know, helpful in a team, offering up suggestions, you know, it's all sort of common sense stuff, but not everyone has it, you know. So like, if you make an effort to start with the basics, which is that communicating really well, asking for help when you need it, presenting work regularly, and just being honest, you know. So a lot of the time, you know, we'll see occasionally people maybe really struggle with work, which is not uncommon. We all do at some stage, but it's the way you deal with it, you know. Like, if we'll have an artist come to me and say, look, I'm having real trouble with this, I've done this and that, I've tried this and that, and then we can work on it together and sort of move forward. And that's an example of being a sort of really good team player. So I guess a mixture of that, keeping on top of the actual work, communicating really well. And then if you're working for a half decent company, they should be pretty progressive about, you know, ongoing training and learning. So that would be something else you'll be diving into, you know, as a compositor, always trying to learn new techniques. And almost every show will probably have some new technique or some sort of, you know, little template for you to work with. So yeah, that's another part to dive in with. Shall I go on to being a comp soup role, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like, so what's the difference? I assume that like it's the next level, and you have like a group of compositors working for you now. So
yes.
you're the head, so the leadership comes in, and like, I think more managerial stuff comes in. So like, give us a glimpse of how that one looked like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, so you're totally right saying about the sort of managerial side of things, and it's something you sort of lament sometimes, because, you know, you go into the industry to essentially be an artist. You know, I don't know if anyone thinks like, oh, I really want to get in there and you know, deal with politics or whatever, but, you know, it does come with the territory. But yeah, I mean, composing supervisor, you know, at a bigger studio, on a film, you'd be looking after maybe 30 to 40 people, which is pretty sizable. Generally, you'll have leads underneath as well, which can help out, which is sort of, you know, right hand men and women that can take on some of the sort of tasks to help with the team. Because the bigger the team gets, the more sort of help they need. Well, and obviously supervision, because it's in the name's in the title. So yeah, so on a show as a comp supervisor, essentially you're pretty responsible for everything compositing related, and generally that big part of that is the technical and the aesthetics of it. You know, how it looks. How it looks is driven by the client and your in-house visual effects supervisor. But, you know, I always feel like I'm always sort of fighting for comp, you know. If there's something comp related in the frame or something going on that I can make a suggestion about it, I always kind of stick up for that. Or if I know the team really wants to, you know, go in one direction, or sometimes there's a debate about which department will do what, and, you know, I'm always sort of fighting for that. So you need to represent compositing, and, you know, you're representing the work, the composite work that's going to go out into this film, you know. So you have to sort of be mindful of making sure it's hitting a certain level. The technical aspects of it, there's a lot of that. Working with, especially the bigger companies, working with in between different departments, be working with a matte painting department potentially, and they'll be publishing things like maybe a camera and a projection setup that has to come into Nuke and into the comp pipeline and work for everyone. Same thing with effects. Effects may be doing, if you're working on one of these superhero movies with lots of sort of glows, or it's always hand in hand with comp, and the more complex things get, the more sort of pipeline you need as well, which can be, it's a really exciting thing to play with. Compositing, you may think you're always just sort of rotoing or keying or something, but there's a lot of interconnects, there's a lot of Python programming, PyQt making interfaces, and, larger companies, you'll be diving into a database, like a centrally organized database with publishers. And so we end up having to deal with a lot of that kind of technical interplay between different departments, tools and techniques and publishers. And generally the idea behind all this is to make it easier and more consistent. But if anyone's dealt with pipelines before, there's never perfect, and sometimes you spend a lot of time just making that stuff work. But when it does work, it's brilliant, because for example, you can have 30 compositors working on, I don't know, during 1 week, 60, 100 shots maybe, and say if a new technique or something from effects comes out and you want to propagate it out, harnessing the power of a pipeline and publishing and tools and whatnot can really do that, can pick things up and, potentially automatically render stuff combined for you and published out. And so, yeah, some of the technical aspects of the role is handling that, the interconnect between departments. And then some of it's, obviously Nuke itself, making sure we've all got the right tools in conjunction with the team, because I like to encourage any of the compositors to, if they've come up with a little technique, they can roll into what we call a Nuke gizmos, if anyone's played around with that, which is a little collection of nodes you can collapse down and give a little interface to make a little useful tool. Keeping track of that, and yeah, working with production as well, which, the overall sort of management of a show. Be helping with bidding, once we get awarded a show, they will, we'll look at all the shots that are coming in-house, and we go through each one and assess the complexity and how long it'll take and what sort of level we need an artist to work on. Scheduling as well, there's something else I work with. At bigger companies, you will also have the compositing department to deal with, which is like a department manager and a coordinator. And they'll be the ones that sort of offer you up it's kind of like, not recruitment, but they handle all the artist placements, on different shows. So you'll be sort of negotiating or dealing with them about who's going to be on your show, who you're going to get for leads, and what they're going to do. Yeah, and then when it gets, obviously you're there to support the VFX supervisor, and you're in all the reviews. You're making sure things are going right. Some things they don't go right, and sometimes you get sort of pulled aside a little bit by the VFX soup and say, hey, the scene with the cars, all the backgrounds aren't looking great. What's going on? And then if it's compositing related, so, oh yeah, okay, cool, we'll dive into that and we'll figure out what's going on. That's sort of an example of just being responsible essentially for comp and your team, and making sure everything's coming together as expected.
Awesome. I see here from the lovely group of students who are listening to you now, I see a few names that are very interested in compositing as a future career. I see Alan, Alicia, Tyler, Yongbin, Liam, or Tianlin. These and many others right. So we always have a very clear picture out there, because there are defined jobs that students start with, like ATD or an intern for modeling, but there is no clear pathway, not at the moment, but for the compositing. So first of all, how to be a good compositor, how they can showcase their skill set and what they should do to show off themselves as someone who might shine and would be picked by different companies or different shows. and then like where to look at. So the second question is where to look at.
True. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's, traditionally, especially in this part of the world, it's I wouldn't say difficult, but it's like maybe not the most obvious choice, compositing. But I mean, I'm a real proponent for it because it's one of the disciplines that's really proving to sort of last the test of time. Things are changing a little bit in the industry. As I'm sure all of you are seeing, in terms of like real-time rendering and, sort of big video screen volume kind of walls, Mandalorian, what ILM's doing. And I've heard a few rumblings before, like, oh, that means compositing is all going to go away, because all the backgrounds are there. But totally it's the opposite, like there's a lot of work for compositing these days because, I mean, it's just a huge part of it's the invisible stuff, it's like, it's where, and I say that in the sense of like, not that it's boring because I mean, there's some things that are more simple, but just like that's sort of like the tip of the iceberg, it's like.
I love compositing. That was my I was look dev artist and compositor, and I totally enjoyed it. And I also like for students of mine who like me and you are a big fan of cinema and cinematography and understanding the movie and the film,
yeah,
and the qualities within a picture, like a moving picture. Compositing is like, it's fantastic. It's just like it's like paint. It's like a brush for a painter. So like you just start build up like the universe that you have in mind by yourself. Sorry for interrupting you. So.
Okay. No, I guess I was sort of losing track of my train of thought though there, but it's just saying that like may think there's
how to be a good compositor, yes. And where to look at.
Exactly. Yes. Well, just in terms of like the amount of work that's out there, like there's just so much demand for content these days, and yes, some of it's sort of invisible visual effects, maybe cleaning up something or replacing something in the background, and then of course there's the really obvious compositing stuff like sort of magic and all those kind of superhero things. But yes, I mean, another great thing about compositing is that it sort of can be standalone, like you don't need a huge team to create some really cool stuff. And I'm sure you've seen that in some of your maybe smaller, you're starting off little projects or little things where you can do a lot to an image without needing animators or something model or something lit. There's a lot of creative things you can do, and Nuke's pretty amazing these days with the amount of work you can do in there. It's got a pretty comprehensive 3D system. There's renderers that plug into it. RenderMan can plug into it. There's a raised render now these days. There's a point render as well. There's a tool called Eddy, which is this volumetric tool that has path trace lighting in it. That was actually built out of some guys out of Wellington, which is pretty amazing. You should dive into and have a look at that if you haven't seen it yet. So I mean, just in terms of sort of career progression, where it's going, like there's a lot. It's very flexible compositing. There's a lot of good stuff going on, and you see things like lighting. And some companies are becoming sort of, the team's coming a little bit smaller because it's getting a little bit easier. And the more the real-time stuff means you essentially have like director of photography doing it. And then, then it'll, I'm oversimplifying it, but it's just looking at, how teams kind of what their sizes are. I mean, I see a lot of demand for compositing, and just getting back to when you're junior or starting out and really want to get into it. I mean, the traditional way of getting into it is through Paint and Roto, essentially, which there is good demand from even smaller companies here taking on juniors doing that kind of work. And I started off doing that, and I really think there's the fundamentals of compositing that I think is just crucial to get right earlier on. And whether you're doing that for a job, whether you're doing that studying, or you've come out of studying and you're working part-time, there's so many tutorials and whatnot. You can just keep hacking away at home doing it. Foundry's got some great licenses as well for students and ex-students, and for anyone really. Like the most expensive sort of basic thing is the Nuke Indie software, which I think is $500 US a year. But that means you can do commercial work with it as well. I mean, there's other tiers that are non-commercial that, you know, based around student life, that kind of thing. But yeah, so, you know, I'd recommend just, you know, working away at it. If getting in at entry level may mean doing paint and roto potentially, you know, paint sort of, you know, clearing up things that maybe like wire work to remove, or, you know, things from the frame that need to go away, crew, set, or whatnot. And working through those skills, you can, you know, some of that work is really complicated, and by that time you're a junior compositor basically. Like, you do really, really complex paint stuff, because you're really hand in hand with the 3D system. You might have some LiDAR that was taken on set where you can project bits on the plate, so it gets quite full on there. If you don't have, sort of touching on that a little bit, if you don't have work as such, you know, like you haven't really landed that first job or whatever, I mean, just try and make as many contacts as you can. Talk to me, send me an email. In terms of like just reaching out in the industry and just start asking questions. And, you know, if someone came to me and said, hey, you know, just graduated, but I love compositing, or I love, you know, Python scripting, what do you recommend I start working with? And then, you know, I could offer suggestions of you know, things to sort of dive into. And you can do anything. You could go away, you could shoot stuff. Cameras are great these days. Phone cameras are great these days. You could go out there and, you know, if you don't have skills as sort of paint removal or whatever, go out and just shoot some stuff and just do it, you know. And there's so many tutorials, you know, online as well. So just having that passion, just working away at it. And, you know, for recent grads, you know, it's tough for sort of any industry, and you may be working part-time jobs somewhere, you know, like me. If you're able to get something slightly film related, that's awesome. If not, if you're just getting cash in but have spare time to keep working on stuff, totally recommend it. You know, if you've got anyone who's got the passion always gets there, you know, like, and that's the cool thing about our industry, the visual effects industry. It's like, it's super strong. There's so much demand, and the people you work with are genuinely really passionate people. You don't have anyone in it just for the money, because it'd be such a hard job just for the money, because you've got to throw so much of yourself at it, you know, like your creativity and your enthusiasm and all that kind of stuff. So just hang in there and just chip away at it. Yeah, definitely getting the core fundamental stuff for compositing going, you know, just learning everything from the ground up, you know, how the filters on all the transforms work, and preserving quality, doing that paint roto cleanup, figuring out, you know, how the color correctors should work. And there's just so much online these days, which is awesome. Foundry, and maybe we could send out a link to anyone that's really keen on compositing. Foundry released a video a wee while back about, I can't remember what it's called. It's like the essential things junior compositors need to know or something. And some of you may have seen that, but it's really, really cool. It's a really cool introduction to essentially what I'm trying to articulate, all of these different modules of the
foundations of compositing.
Yeah.
So gladly, our visual effects students, they go through multiple projects that they have to film. They have to like practically like build some artifacts that some of them are heavily compositing based. So they build up like outcomes for their future tutorial. As we are approaching towards the end, so just like, do you think is it okay if I ask if anyone might have any questions?
Absolutely, yeah, I'd love to.
Guys, anyone might have any questions from Scott? You can turn on your mic and just ask, or just type in the chat. Okay. Michael asks, with the increasing popularity of streaming platforms such as Netflix and Disney Plus, is there a demand for VFX artists in this field, and how can a student head in this specific direction? Like they become, I think this is a question, how to be a compositing artist and work on these shows.
That's awesome. That's a great question. There is huge demand. You know, probably the most demand is the streamers, you know, so much. You may have, you know, if you read the news, you hear about what's going on. Like Apple are really diving pretty majorly, and they're sort of playing catch up, but they got all the money in the world. Yeah, there is a lot. I mean, generally all the tentpole stuff, like, you know, the biggest names and the biggest kind of shows there are turning to be on par with like some of the biggest film, you know, work that's done as well. And obviously that goes to like, you know, the biggest studios who have the best people, and jumping straight into there, you know, as in a sort of junior capacity, it's maybe a little bit more difficult. But having said that, like there's a bit of work floating around New Zealand, which has been pretty great. There's been a few of the streamers have been shooting here and then posting here, doing visual effects here as well. One of the Apple's done that recently with Mr. Corman. That's come out recently, a series, and a lot of the work was done here with some of the smaller visual effects companies, which is so awesome to see, you know, because I love the idea of New Zealand not being just one huge visual effects company, but just having, you know, having a really healthy industry, you know, obviously. And then, you know, for students coming out, you know, I'm really hopeful for the future that there is more around. And, you know, there are small companies, you probably know there's a few up in Auckland that are sort of coming up, and just love to see, you know, all that sort of rise. And yeah, there has been a few streamers been shooting here recently and looking to do the visual effects here too, because I think probably it ties into their rebates, you know, their tax incentives essentially. So just in terms of a pathway to get there, I mean, you might be, I mean, the idea in your head might be, I saw WandaVision, I'd love to, you know, be part of that team or something. And yeah, I mean, realistically from the get-go, may not, you know, might not land your first job doing that, but the potential is there. And what's really great is seeing that actually some of that happening here. And the other thing is the visual effects studios around the world are starting to feel a little bit more global, you know, because they're just because of the demand of the work and the demand of artists to work on things. There's a lot of remote working happening now, which is pretty amazing. It's kind of new, you know, because it's the whole COVID thing. We're sort of a year into it. There's a whole thing tied around there with security requirements from the studios, because they're very cautious about their material getting around the place. But it's starting to spread open. You know, if any of you start diving into LinkedIn and, you know, hooking up with some of the companies that you sort of aspire to work for, you'll just start seeing, I've seen this recently, just streams of we're hiring everyone, we're hiring for everyone, you know. And so, yeah, so, you know, for someone starting out, obviously it may be hard sort of to get in the door, but, you know, as I said, you find the passion, find as many connections as you can, work on yourself. That, I think that's so important to be able to show potential new employers what you've been up to. You know, if you haven't landed that first job, just making that connection and just showing what your attempts are essentially on your own or your student work to better yourself and maybe emulate some of the work that you'd like to get. But yeah, long story short, there definitely is potential because there's so much work around, and there's New Zealand companies working on streamers, and there's overseas companies that may employ you at some point remotely as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Tyler have a good question here. She says, I'd love to hear more about the collaboration process with the director, producers, and other VFX artists as a compositor.
Sure. I guess that means when we're dealing with clients and how the director sort of works with us potentially.
I think she means more your team, like directors, producers, and other VFX artists. So how do you collaborate with them as a compositing artist?
Is it more like maybe more direct with the director, like sort of straight to them?
Do you want to turn on your mic and ask Tyler without me trying to interpret you? I don't think she might have like a mic. So I can read her question again. Hi, Scott. I'd love to hear more about the collaboration process with the director, producers, and other VFX artists.
All right. I'm trying to answer the best I can. Other VFX artists, I guess that means internally, as a team, we, I guess, you know, the bigger companies, you've got sort of that hierarchy, you know, like I'd be, as a compositing supervisor, is working with the comp artists, which we touched on earlier about the dailies and that kind of round trip. Creative collaboration, and teams generally will split stuff up into sequences. So if you're working on a big film, there might be like an end battle, or there might be a piece in the middle of the film where there's an aircraft carrier with some CG planes that land or whatever. And so generally you're split up into teams a little bit like that. In terms of, you know, the creative work there, you'd work, in a team with a lead essentially, and then you'd probably discuss ideas and look at material. And a big part of that too is looking at art reference quite a lot. Whether it's something we need to pull ourselves or whether the client supplies that. If the brief is aircraft carrier, planes landing in a snowstorm, or some sort of weather event, you'd be looking at lots of sort of reference of exactly that you can find, because it's always best to try and find some reality, because a little bit of a trap sometimes is copying other movies. And so sometimes it's useful, but not always. Like, it's always probably best to sort of go back to nature or reality. So the bigger studios, is collaboration sort of happens all the time. Generally, you don't sort of silo it so much. You don't have like little teams just sort of working away on their own a lot. It's generally spread all the way up to the VFX. So you would always be sort of showing stuff together, and rapid sort of rotation of reviews and trying things out and doing alternate takes and whatnot, to keep it pretty smooth. I mean, a lot of shows are not that complicated in that sense. There's not maybe a lot of like really creative things to do, just in terms of sort of look development or whatever. It might be reasonably straightforward. You know what it needs to look like. Maybe it's a car driving along the road, and you know what needs to happen outside the window. So they have their own challenges. But then on the other end of the scale, sometimes you get the brief that's like completely like, we're in space. There's an exploding nebula or something. This big monster head comes out of the middle of it. It's like with nothing essentially. So you got to pull all these art references and that's really exciting sometimes. You pull ideas from all sorts of different cultures, different mythology, medical imaging, all sorts of things, where that's really fun creative side of things, where you can pull things together. And that's sort of independent of the client as well at the initial stages, which is really fun. It's just trying to build something cool in-house that we can send over. And then in terms of collaborating with the producers and directors and whatnot, bigger films, that's kind of, you're a little bit isolated, but not too much. There's sort of a process to go with. Normally, like on a big, say, superhero movie, they'll have a visual effects supervisor on their side. And almost all movies these days will have multiple vendors. So it's not just one company working on it the whole way through. They'll be all split up. There's a few exceptions, but generally that's how they do it. So the client-side visual effects supervisor is handling maybe, say, 5 different studios, maybe all the way around the world. They spend a lot of time like this, video chats. But they are sort of not gatekeepers, but they're representing the visual effects on the whole film for the director and making sure the director's vision's getting properly done, and also like trying to get the best out of the studios as well, because they've got an eye for how the work should look, and they'll be always pushing the vendors, the studios working on, to do the best work. Some shows you get lucky and you get really close collaboration with directors. We've had a few down here in New Zealand working on films with us, and sometimes they'll come in the office and they'll walk around the desk. Maybe they'll come and see everyone that's working on it, which is unfortunately a little bit rare. But then when it does happen, it's very cool. So you can be one-on-one with the director and the producers when they come through. But for the most part, on the bigger movies, it's a remote connection there. And then some directors are just not that comfortable with visual effects, so they sort of leave that over to the visual effects supervisor on their side, which you can still have great relationships there. It's just the biggest problem with all these creative people together is getting stuff approved. And for some of the big studios, like we call them the suits, which the head of the studios will step into reviews after we've done a lot of work and then decide to change everything. So that's kind of the classic VFX issue, dealing with studio changes, which can be good and bad. I mean,
but working on a shot that like it gets approved, but it cuts out of final release, and just say,
yeah, someone cuts it. That's very disappointing, and that's another sort of string to your bow in terms of resilience and working as a team. You've got to be prepared for things like that. So sometimes whole sequences go. Yeah, you still get paid. It's okay. But great.
As long as you get paid, yeah. Okay. Any other question before we wrap it up? Danielle asks, would you prefer entry-level entry-level artists to connect with you by, so that was my last question. Actually just wanted to ask Scott, because Daniele, and we have like lots of third-year students here, include as well as second-year students and first-year students. I see some first-year students. Guys, you are amazing. So so they are wrapping up their final projects, and also they're preparing their showreel, like, you know, they're finalizing their project. Is it okay if do you give like kind of your permission so they can connect with you and talk to you and show their work and ask your comments on it?
Absolutely. Yep. I should just put a disclaimer. I'm not recruitment. Jobs. I'm not just jobs just yet, but absolutely. You know, if you want to talk about anything, really, ask me a question. Want me to look at, you know, your reel, your CV, or whatever, advice. You know, places to contact or whatever. Yeah, absolutely.
That's very.
I'm sure you can pass my details, and yeah, happy to talk to anyone.
It's very generous of you. We all know that how precious is your time. So even like just looking at some work and just giving some feedback on their work would make a huge change, because they apply your comments and they kind of improve their works, and it will help them. Absolutely. So Daniela, yes. So I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you.
It was a fantastic talk. Actually, I really enjoyed your story from the because it started from the very beginning, and I could connect with it, with a lot of things that you talked about. And it's fantastic that such a distinguished, amazing artist has allocated some time for us, and we enjoyed listening to your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and all the best.
Stay safe.
Yeah, you too. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
See you. Thank you.